Hi guys, welcome back to the Bluegrass Kids. Today we're going to be reading A Bear Called Paddington Part 2. So let's get started.
For a brief moment, he had a dizzy impression of everything and everyone being upside down. He waved his paws wildly in the air, and then, before anyone could catch him, he somersaulted backwards and landed with a splash in his saucer of tea. He jumped up even quicker than he had sat down because the tea was still very hot, and promptly stepped into Mr. Brown's cup. Judy threw back her head and laughed until the tears rolled down her face. "Oh, Mummy, isn't he funny?" she cried. Paddington, who didn't think it at all funny, stood for a moment with one foot on the table and the other in Mr. Brown's tea. There were large patches of white cream all over his face, and on his left ear there was a lump of strawberry jam. "You wouldn't think," said Mrs. Brown, "that everyone could get in such a state with just one bun." Mr. Brown coughed. He had just caught the stern eye of a waitress on the other side of the counter. "Perhaps," he said, "we'd better go. I'll see if I can find a taxi." He picked up Judy's belongings and hurried outside. Paddington stepped gingerly off the table and, with a last look at the sticky remains of his bun, climbed down onto the floor. Judy took one of his paws. "Come along, Paddington. We'll take you home, and you can have a nice hot bath. Then you can tell me all about South America. I'm sure you must have had lots of wonderful adventures." "I have," said Paddington earnestly. "Lots. Things are always happening to me. I'm that sort of bear." When they came out of the buffet, Mr. Brown had already found a taxi, and he waved them across. The driver looked hard at Paddington and then at the inside of his nice, clean taxi. "Bears is extra," he said gruffly. "Sticky Bears is twice as much again." "He can't help being sticky, driver," said Mr. Brown. "He's just had a nasty accident." The driver hesitated. "All right, hop in, but mind none of it comes off on me interior. I only cleaned it out this morning." The Browns trooped obediently into the back of the taxi. Mr. and Mrs. Brown and Judy sat in the back, while Paddington stood on a tip-up seat behind the driver so that he could see out of the window. The sun was shining as they drove out of the station, and after the gloom and the noise, everything seemed bright and cheerful. They swept past a group of people at a bus stop, and Paddington waved. Several people stared, and one man raised his hat in return. It was all very friendly. After weeks of sitting alone in a lifeboat, there was so much to see. There were people and cars and big red buses everywhere. It wasn't a bit like darkest Peru. Paddington kept one eye out of the window in case he missed anything. With his other eye, he carefully examined Mr. and Mrs. Brown and Judy. Mr. Brown was fat and jolly, with a big mustache and glasses, while Mrs. Brown, who was also rather plump, looked like a large edition of Judy. Paddington had just decided he was going to like staying with the Browns when the glass window behind the driver shot back and a gruff voice said, "Where did you say you wanted to go?" Mr. Brown leaned forward. "Number 32, Windsor Gardens." The driver cupped his ear with one hand. "Can't hear you," he shouted. Paddington tapped him on the shoulder. "Number 32 Windsor Gardens," he repeated. The taxi driver jumped at the sound of Paddington's voice and narrowly missed hitting a bus. He looked down at his shoulder and glared. "Cream," he said bitterly. "All over me new coat." Judy giggled, and Mr. and Mrs. Brown exchanged glances. Mr. Brown peered at the meter. He half expected to see a sign go up saying they had to pay another 50 pence. "I beg your pardon," said Paddington. He bent forward and tried to rub the stain off with his other paw. Several bun crumbs and a smear of jam added themselves mysteriously to the taxi driver's coat. The driver gave Paddington a long, hard look. Paddington raised his hat, and the driver slammed the window shut again. "Oh dear," said Mrs. Brown. "We really shall have to give him a bath as soon as we get indoors. It's getting everywhere." Paddington looked thoughtful. It wasn't so much that he didn't like baths. He really didn't mind being covered with jam and cream. It seemed a pity to wash it all off quite so soon. But before he had time to consider the matter, the taxi stopped, and the Browns began to climb out. Paddington picked up his suitcase and followed Judy up a flight of white steps to a big green door. "Now you're going to meet Mrs. Bird," said Judy. "She looks after us. She's a bit fierce sometimes, and she grumbles a lot, but she doesn't really mean it. I'm sure you'll like her." Paddington felt his knees begin to tremble. He looked round for Mr. and Mrs. Brown, but they appeared to be having some sort of argument with the taxi driver. Behind the door, he could hear footsteps approaching. "I'm sure I shall like her, if you say so," he said, catching sight of his reflection on the brightly polished letterbox. "But will she like me?"
So, maybe I'll read some a little bit? Or should we end at this chapter?
I'll end the chapter and start another video, and you can stitch them together.
I know, but... So, guys, I know this was not a very long video because it's 4th of July, and it's very late because we have to go somewhere.
And noisy.
Yeah, it's noisy. So, that's why we didn't have much time to read. But next time we're going to be starting Chapter 2, A Bear in Hot Water, which is, that looks bad. That really does. So, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, smash that like button and subscribe. And have a good 4th of July because that's what today is. So, bye. See you in the next video. Well, bye.